Hey everybody, it's Brad's friend Dave, and I want to add in a quick correction to the top of the show this week. We're talking Patreon, and I got my numbers wrong on Patreon fees. You'd think I'd get it right since I have 3 Patreons running from Sheldon and Drive and ComicLab, but like an overactive kid pumped full of sugar, I was so excited to talk this week I didn't slow down and check my numbers. So, since it doesn't change the spirit of the conversation we have on the show, we're going to keep it as is, but I wanted to correct those numbers right up front. So Patreon has 3 different tiers with 3 different platform fees. The Lite plan charges 5%, the Pro plan charges 8%, or 5% if you're grandfathered, and the Premium plan charges 12%, or 9% if you're grandfathered. And then, of course, there are payment processing fees on top of that, and those will vary based on the amounts and location being charged. So the spirit of today's conversation is still true, but I just wanted to correct my error right up front since I was a little bit of a silly goose and got all that wrong. Anyway, all right, that's it. Let's hit that music. So, Brad, can I share with you an example of why I sometimes am book smart, world stupid? This is.
I'm here for that conversation.
I don't know where I got that self-description, but I'm sometimes very smart in terms of bookishness and sometimes really stupid in terms of basic day-to-day things.
Yeah.
So, young me moves to Los Angeles, to the big city from the small town of Southern California. I moved to the big city of Southern California, Los Angeles.
Oh,
Get my,
boy, here I
get,
am.
get my, yeah, oh, look at me, world, look out. And I throw my hat into the air.
You get off the bus in Los Angeles, say hello to Scott Baio, keep walking.
Just keep moving. So I'm in my first crappy apartment in Los Angeles. It has a little gate out in front of it so that you have to go through the keyed gate to get to the apartment, right?
Mm-hmm.
At one point, my future wife, Gloria, and my friend Alexa and I decide we're going to go get an ice cream cookie. So with flip-flops and shorts on, because it's summer in California, we go out to get an ice cream cookie. We're coming back with this giant, half-melty cookie thing in our hand.
Yeah.
And we go in through the gate. Well, somebody's foot catches the gate behind me.
Oh, no.
And suddenly, Brad, I find a 9mm to my forehead. Remember, I moved to Los Angeles 2 days beforehand, right? So it's like city mouse or country mouse moves to the city, and I suddenly have a gun to my head, and he goes, "Give me your wallet." Now, here's my where I become world stupid. I'm book smart, world stupid. The guy has a gun to my head, and he asks for my wallet. I pull the wallet out, and instead of handing him fucking wholesale my wallet, what I do is I go, "Do you mind if I get my library card out and my Blockbuster card out and my driver's license out?" And then I pass him the wallet. But I've gone through and I've rifled through to get all my identification. So I literally said, "I just don't want to have to redo all these cards." The guy's got a gun to me, Brad, and I'm like, I don't want to have to go to the library and get a new card.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to have to do that, and you certainly don't want to have to do it with a bullet in your scalp.
But I'm just such a dummy. What a dumb. Like, what? Can you imagine getting to heaven? They're like, "So, did you have a good run?" "Yeah, I had a pretty good run." "What ended up killing you?" "I wanted to save my library card, and a guy that was really mad ended up anyway." Oh,
it
geez
could have been
Louise.
worse, Dave. I literally thought that you were going to tell me that you asked him to hold your ice cream cookie. All right, your money or your life. Okay, no problem. Here, hold on to this for me.
Here's the tragedy.
The
The poor guy. I say the poor guy. The poor guy robbed 3 people.
Yeah.
Right? But we're all in our young 20s, and it's in a not great apartment in Los Angeles. And between the 3 of us, we figured it out later, he got $16 off of us.
Yeah, and
I had like
an
$3.
overdue library fine.
Yeah, and an overdue library card, which I hope he brought that book back. My Frank Herbert Dune copy was 2 weeks overdue. I hope he returned it. Anyway, but here's where, I got to tell you, Brad, here's where being robbed, here's where being robbed at gunpoint has its advantages, okay?
Yeah.
Every time, Brad, I get called for jury duty, I get up to the jury screening box. They're like, "All right, juror number 14, if you'll step up." Step. Sit down in the little chair. "All right, juror 14, have you ever been the victim of gun violence?" "Yes, I have." And then they go, "All right, you're immediately dismissed." Because no defense attorney wants somebody on the jury that's like had a gun in their forehead, you know?
Right.
I always go, "Well, yes, I mean, I've had a 9mm to my face. It was not fired, but it was to my face." And they're like, "All right, juror, you're excused." And I'm like, "Well, Here's another jury that I get to skip out on. That's great.
Dave gets excused from the jury, walks through as he's going past the judge, says, "Still got my Blockbuster card."
Still
Just
angry
gotta-
about that. Still,
The
still.
wheels of justice do turn. I've
It
still
would be
got
funny though, Brad, if they're like, "All right, juror 14, you're dismissed," and I'm like, "Really? This is an insurance scam case. Why are you dismissing me?"
and the bailiff whips out his weapon and says, "Here's why. Give me that ice cream cookie."
Anyway, give me that ice cream cookie. On that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the violence-free show about making comics.
And the violence-free show about making a living from comics, or a dying, as the case might have been. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his very street-savvy friend, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon, still holding on to my library card, co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of Blockbuster Comic Advice is brought to you by patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. Well, big topic to start off the show this week, and
Yeah.
I am full of piss and vinegar about this one. Patreon, kind of unsurprisingly, because we heard rumors of this down the last 6 to 18 months here.
Mm-hmm.
They were thinking about this. They are now going to offer a new service, Brad, called Patreon Capital.
Yeah.
Which is, for lack of a better phrase, a microloan. It's akin to a payday advance. Although not really. But what it is, let's say you, Brad Geiger, are pulling in $4,000 a month on Patreon, but you need 10,000 capital for a big new push. You're going to build a podcasting studio for ComicLab, Brad, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could go to a bank and get a $10,000 loan at a fixed rate and have a payback schedule. Or apparently now, Patreon, much like PayPal or Shopify or Venmo or all these other tech companies who have figured out that microloans are a big money spinner for them,
Yeah.
you could now get a microloan from Patreon for that $10,000 and pay it back from your earnings over what I gather is the next 2 years.
Right.
That seems to be the term they are establishing.
Yes.
Now, anyway, I've got a lot of vinegar to share on this one, but I want to turn it over to you because I feel like you have done more reading on it. You are better informed. You're certainly better looking. So let's hear what you have to say about Patreon Capital.
Well, okay, so I want to first address that first thing that you said, and you said it's kind of like a payday loan. And if you go out to Twitter right now and you put in Patreon Capital, you're going to see exactly that response from people. You're going to see, I think right now the top return is saying, in my opinion, this is 236 predatory. And a lot of people using the terms payday loans. This is like a payday loan. Let's get our facts straight first. What a payday loan is on the 20th of the month, you say, geez, I'm out of money. I can't wait until the 31st. I'll make a contract with this payday loan corporation. They'll front me the money when the paycheck does come. They're going to take a bite out of that. But the benefit for me is I can get that money early when I need it. That's a payday loan. It is, as we're about to find out, if all I had done was read the clickbait headline in TheVerge.com and read that sensational and frankly not really well-written lead paragraph in TheVerge.com, I'd have the same exact opinion. If all I had done was read that clickbait headline, I'd feel the same way.
But here's the good news, listener. Brad has not just read that front page paragraph.
No,
Here's the good
because
news
I've
for all
got
of
this
us.
really annoying thing that I do called thinking for myself. And when I saw people also...
This is Grandpa at the porch, all right?
Listen, buckle in. You're going to see Grandpa Geiger at his best right now, or at his worst, depending on how you feel about Grandpa Geiger. But I also saw some very intelligent people, cartoonists that I respect the blazes out of, say stuff like, well, how long is it going to be until somebody, some uninsured creator takes out a loan for medical expenses and gets trapped owing back Patreon because they took on so much investor capital? Again, if all I had done was read the clickbait headline, I'd feel the same way. But I decided to do more than a couple seconds and go off The Verge, and I'm like, okay, there's the bad thing about Patreon is that They did not put any information out about this. I went
No,
to the
they did
Patreon
not, which
blog.
is a
There's
that's
nothing there, and
there's like PR 101, Brad. Come
that's a
on,
misstep. That's a
you got to
misstep.
control your own story. That's a misstep. I agree
Yes,
with you.
but I was able to find a case study, an example of somebody that had done Patreon Capital, and so I'm like, okay, how did it work for them? So far, about a dozen of these Patreon Capital cash advances have been given out, and they talked to somebody that did one of them. It was the case of Multitude, a Brooklyn-based podcast collective, and the crew had been developing a somewhat experimental audio sitcom series called The Next Stop. And because they were planning to build the series as a SAG-AFTRA production, and therefore they'd have to pay SAG-AFTRA wages, they were
Dues,
faced
right? Yeah.
with requiring more money up front, naturally,
Right.
right?
Right.
So they're in a
Right.
situation, they're doing really well. They've got a Patreon for Multitude that's going just fine. They want to do this other thing called Next Step, but it requires a lot of money up front. So what do? They approach Patreon through this Patreon Capital thing, and they say, we need 75 grand to make this thing happen. So Patreon, through Patreon Capital, says, basically, we'll front you the money. We'll front you the 75K. We'll front you that money. And in return, you will start a Patreon for The Next Step, this new project. Patreon will take a bigger bite out of the pledges for The Next Step for the next 2 years until the loan is paid back in full. If that doesn't happen in 2 years, then Patreon will go to that other existing Patreon campaign for Multitude that's already going great guns and take bigger bites out of that until the loan is paid back in full. In other words, this is not the equivalent of a payday loan. It's not the equivalent even of those blank checks that your credit card company sends you, right? The ones that say, you need a cash fast, just write yourself a check. And Citibank will put the money in, and then, of course, you're owing whatever, 23% interest on it. It's not the equivalent of that. In fact, from what I can see, based on this case study that we're given, it's not even like a push button thing where you say, oh, Patreon Capital, click, 75K, and all I got to do is sign over my soul. It's not that either. What it is, Dave, is very similar to before Kickstarter, when I took out a $10,000 loan at PNC Bank to get the third Evil Ink book printed. I wanted 10K up front. I had to pay it back. They had stipulations on how that payback was going to happen. I had the choice of going forward or not going forward. And I signed the papers and got my book done. In other words, this sounds very much to me like a variation on a very common thing that happens every day in business. It's a business loan, and they're taking a very now. If you want to go into how they're doing the payback, and that doesn't make you comfortable, I'll listen to it. But we're not going to call this a payday loan because it's not. We're not going to call it like a push button thing where somebody who's got cancer can push a button and get funding. How could that cancer patient, this imaginary cancer patient, would have to go and sit down with somebody at Patreon and say, this is my business plan? It would never work. They're never gonna. That's a situation, frankly, that I'm very confident so far, until I see something on the Patreon blog that proves me wrong.
Okay.
Never going to happen. Now, if we want to talk about that payback and whether that's fair or not, I'm listening. But let's take all that payday loan stuff and all these these conjurings of medical bills being used to pay medical bills. We're taking that, we're throwing right out the window, because so far, based on what I see from Patreon Capital, the one example that we're given, it's nothing to do with that.
Okay, well, so I come at this, you're being very forgiving of what this whole concept is, and that's okay. You are coming at it from a, look, this is the commonplace business practice. Now they're extending it to artists for whom they have transparency on their income and their income history and their potential future earnings in a way that maybe even a bank would have a little trouble figuring out. So I understand that, and I'm willing to grant them that. But I come at this. My Vincent Price eyebrow is very arched when I heard about this Patreon Capital thing, because what I see from it is a company that's transiting over $500 million a year, right,
Mhm.
from readers to or from fans and art consumers to artists, right? They're transiting that 500 billion or $500 million,
Mhm.
of which they are earning 2.9% plus 30 cents a transaction. So roughly, with a quick back of envelope math, a little less than $15 million a year, right?
Right.
Now, granted, they have been expanding very heavily with employees and frankly burning through VC capital cash. So
Yeah,
I
fair
get it
comment.
that I understand,
Yeah.
as a business person myself, I understand that their overhead is probably very significant, maybe more than I even want to grant them that they have, because Brad, there's nothing worse than launching a Kickstarter and people go, "Why is it so expensive? It's a book costs $1 to make." Like, well,
Right,
because it's way
right,
more than that, right? Like,
right.
I understand that Patreon has both liability costs that I can't even consider in terms of
Mhm.
credit card processing. They
Mhm.
have legal fees that I can't even consider. So I get that there is an expensive business. But my fundamental problem with Patreon Capital as a business venture is that this feels like a response not to a need on behalf of artists, but on a need on behalf of the venture capitalists who have put up $165 million for Patreon. And much as happened with newspapers, where newspapers were earning a tremendous return, but
Yeah.
VC capital came in to newspapers, bought them out, and said, "No, we want to go from a 20% return to a 30% return.
Oh,
So how about we lay off, 20% of our staff? We sell off these 3 buildings. We reduce our column counts, and then we're going to make a lot of money." And what that is it's searching for an ever higher return
right.
for the investors rather than for what the company itself or the consumers or artists using that company need. Like, no one, I have yet to hear an artist dying for something like Patreon Capital to exist. Like, if you now, Beyond, I know you're going to say you borrowed $10,000, but the Kickstarter exists now. This exists to make Patreon a greater return than that 2.9% plus 30 cent transaction fee. This exists to have, frankly, a pay I'm going to use the word microloan return on a business that's not used to those percentages. You know what I mean? And
Microloan
so
is
my Vincent Price eyebrow goes up and goes, when
microloan
I
is
hear
a
this.
fair comment. Payday loan is unfair. That was the first thing I want. Like I said, that's the first thing I wanted to do was discuss this intelligently. Payday loan is unfair. Microloan is fair. Now, having said that, of course, you and I are never going to use this. I'm never going to use Patreon Capital. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's never going to be appropriate for me. But
Sure.
if I had a project, an ongoing project, right? For example, if I were doing Stripped, but I was doing it once a month in installments, and it was going to be an ongoing thing, like a series instead of a documentary. You remember how much money it took you to do Stripped. And Kickstarter was the right choice for that because it was a one time thing. You could package it, you could get the money, and you could send the thing out. But
Right.
for example, if you wanted to do something that was ongoing, like this Multitude podcast group did with Next Step, and it's an ongoing thing, okay? Now, if you wanted to do something like that, that costs 75 grand upfront to do,
Hmm.
you're going to do one of two things. You're going to either go to the bank and you're going to get an interest rate placed on you and collateral and all
Right.
of that other stuff, or you've got a choice to go to Patreon Capital and take a bigger bite out of your future Patreon pledges until the loan is paid off. One of those, you're going to do one of those things, or you're going to shelve it.
Right.
I don't see that this is taking advantage of anybody because you take it off the table. Now your only choice is going to a bank, and you're going to get taken advantage by a bank too.
Yeah, well, so okay, here's the thing, and this is why their lack of a press release or a blog
Oh,
entry, at least at the point of this recording. And by the way, the more I think about this, the more I realize that that is intentional. They themselves are not putting themselves on the line yet because they have been burned by a couple different past announcements of new ventures.
oh yeah.
So this is actually a clever PR way, now that I'm thinking about it, of testing the waters, seeing what raises people's ire, changing their language appropriately and
Hmm.
maybe even changing their rate and their term
Hmm.
depending on what people are saying online. I'm actually, now that I'm saying this out loud,
That's
I'm realizing that
interesting
this is actually a clever turn.
because I saw somebody on Twitter say, well, it looks like TheVerge.com is Patreon's public relations wing. And my initial response to that was, if that's the truth, Patreon is completely wasting their money. Because again, one of the things that really set me off is that headline and that first paragraph were written in such a way that, of course, you were going to be led to believe that this was a payday loan. That's what I believed when I first saw it until I started digging a little bit. So yeah,
Right.
you and I agree 100% on many things, including uh, this was not a great rollout, and it may have been intentional because now they can walk back any parts of it in the official release.
Yeah. Well, so let me tell you though, that from a banking perspective, this is also different than a microloan,
Hmm.
and it has elements of a payday loan. And one of the reasons why I want to talk about this for just a split second is
Hmm.
that there is a garnishing of wages that does not necessarily happen in a bank loan that does happen in a payday loan that this represents.
Hmm. Hmm.
Patreon has a direct relationship towards gatekeeping your funds if they need to.
Right.
So if you are not actively paying them back, they can sluice that directly towards themselves if they need to, and that is akin to how a payday loan can, with a couple of signatures, can say to your ACH deposit, yeah, we'll also direct 30% towards the payday loan company. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So there is a tiny element of payday loanism to this
Hmm.
it's a little bit like working for a company town. Patreon becomes a little bit too much involved in not only your present earnings, your future earnings, and how you spend your earnings, where you do your earnings. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
the relationship changes from a company that transits your fandom support with a 2.9% fee into your bank account. That's a very different relationship than someone saying, okay, well, we're also going to garnish your future earnings at X amount of rate, which we haven't said publicly yet, by the way, which is a little suspicious.
Yeah. Well.
And
Yeah.
over a term of 2 years, which is also a very short rate if it's a significant amount of money, or short term, sorry. Um, so what I'm saying is, I see why people have hit on the phrase payday loan, even though it is not the same thing.
Hmm.
Because as we all know, one of the big aspects of payday loan companies is their incredibly predatory rates that they charge,
Right.
right?
Right.
To the point that the federal government has got involved in payday loan companies because it's so predatory.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we at this point do not know what Patreon is going to charge as a rate. Is it
Yeah.
going to be 5%, 10%, 30%? We have no idea. And I honestly, Brad, now that I'm saying this out loud, I think that might be intentional on their PR and marketing
Oh.
department to leak this to a couple of journalists, say,
Hmm.
hey, let's see what the reaction is. And then we go, oh, 3 weeks from now, TechCrunch and The Verge got it wrong. Here's how we're actually going to structure it, you know?
Oh God, you know what? That's something that hadn't crossed my mind. And the more you say it, the more it's like, oh, it's a little devious.
Because you know that they screwed the rollout for a couple
Oh.
different last announcements here.
Well,
I love
yeah,
them as a company, but they are not good at rollouts with new information
yeah.
and new plans. So here's the thing. I again go back to the well, and again, this is me full of piss and vinegar. They took on too much venture capital. 165
Agreed.
million was not. It was way too much money to take on. And now they have to pay the piper. And the way they have to pay the piper is things like Patreon merch for members, which you and I have not talked about, but which is not good for artists. It's not good for audiences. The rates are ridiculous. You can make any single item in that and fulfill it for infinitely smaller prices
Yeah.
and not get involved with Patreon at all for that. That's not a great program. Personally, this Patreon capital thing is a cash grab on people that are not making a huge amount of money in their life. It's not. Go ahead. I can see that you want to interrupt me. Go ahead.
Cash
Fight
grab.
me. I want you to fight me. I want to find the right answer on this. So fight me on this.
Let's not use words like cash grab. Here's the deal. Here's the deal.
Come on, it is a cash grab. It is a cash grab.
You're using a couple of loaded terms, cash grab and garnish. Okay. First of all, when your wages are garnished, it's usually involuntary. Nobody comes
Right.
in. Right. But this is voluntary. They're going
yeah,
in
but it's
with
still
their
a
eyes
garnishing of your
open.
it's garnishing of your future wages, and whether you've agreed to it or not, with your rosy-eyed, my new podcast that I'm taking a $75,000 loan on is gonna go great, and I'm gonna increase my Patreon, and so it's okay that they're garnishing my future wages. Like, even if you willingly sign on to it, they have direct access to your payments.
Okay, so I'm going to bring this back to my $10,000 loan for the Third Evil Ink book. All right.
Okay.
When I signed up for that, I had to have a PNC bank account. I had to have a certain amount of money in that account, and I had to agree that every month they were going to take out a certain amount of money, whether I wanted them to or not, from my account to pay that loan.
Right.
How is that different?
It's different in the relationship that you have with the bank. You could declare bankruptcy, and there's a whole series of steps that would go to remove you from the process of them immediately garnishing or taking your numbers, right? With Patreon's case, they are the means by which you get your money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little harder to separate yourself via a bankruptcy declaration from a company that already has access by virtue of their very business relationship with you. You know what I mean?
So you're saying you couldn't...
Is that making sense?
It's getting close, and I might be a little bit thick. You're saying that if I'm on Patreon, I can't declare bankruptcy?
You can. I'm just saying the legality gets weirder. I am not a bankruptcy lawyer. I shouldn't even speak out of turn.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's a little bit more akin to a company town in that when you were working for a mine and buying the groceries from the mine and renting your house from the mine, you become much more intertwined with the way that company makes decisions about your life. When you do a Patreon capital loan through Patreon versus going through a bank loan or going to Kickstarter, you become infinitely more intertwined with Patreon, and it's harder if you make a bankruptcy declaration to separate yourself out from the income source and the payment that is also due to that same company. You know what I mean?
Right. No,
I'm just saying it becomes more complicated for you as an artist.
It absolutely...
If you both get money and pay money to them.
It absolutely becomes more complicated. I'm just trying to figure out which one... Here's the deal. Much like merch for membership, I really don't see myself ever using Patreon Capital because, again, so much of what I do... In other words, even if I were to do that stripped series, right? I would do season 1 on Kickstarter. And then if it went, I would do season 2. In other words, there's an awful lot of this that seems that Kickstarter is a little bit better fit.
It's better for it's also, Kickstarter has the added benefit of testing the market for you before you even take that money and start spending it, you know?
Absolutely.
And so Patreon Capital, Brad, you and I tomorrow could be like, Dave and Brad are going to do a sitcom podcast, and we need $75,000 to build not only the studio space, but also to make it SAG-AFTRA compliant. Oh, the $75,000 is going to be great. And we're going to launch it, and then crickets, Brad, right? And now we're fucking on the hook to Patreon for 75 grand. But had we kickstarted the damn thing, people would have been like, no, I love Brad and Dave. I don't want to see them do a sitcom. I could care less about them doing a sitcom.
Yeah.
So we raised $15,000 of our $75,000 Kickstarter goal. It doesn't go. We tested the market at the same time we were ostensibly taking out a loan or, getting a chunk of cash, and it didn't go. But then with Patreon Capital, you're really rolling the dice without any market testing. So do Kickstarter, because also it's you want to look at it this way, taxes aside, it's a quote unquote micro loan at a 10% fee, right? That's what Kickstarter is. 5% for Kickstarter, 5% roughly for credit card.
Yes.
10% loan for a lot of business loans, that's not bad. That's not bad at all. So I would just, I can't wave my arm strong enough and go, maybe don't do this Patreon Capital thing, artists.
Listen.
I know you're more forgiving of it. And I get what you're saying. Like, you're glad that it exists because it's one more option for artists, right? Is what basically what you're saying.
Sure, that's a really good way of summing it up.
That's fine. I am infinitely more suspicious than you that they have way too much venture capital that they need to start generating bigger sums for to show it's like a relationship that's imbalanced where one person feels they have to keep getting better and better jobs to meet their spouse because their spouse is making so much. I don't know. That's a bad metaphor. You get what I'm saying, though. Like, the venture capitalists went in thinking the return was going to be 25% every year on their money, right? And Patreon is returning them 10% a year on their money. Great return, no argument. A 10% return, amazing.
Right.
But they need that venture capital return to be tech numbers, not small business numbers,
Yeah.
you know?
No, and I
That's what's happening.
that's something I agree with 100%. In other words, the venture capital aspect has always made me a little bit nervous. And
They
listen,
took too
I've
much
said this
money.
on this show many, many times, and I'll be the first to admit it. I've got a huge blind spot when it comes to Patreon because they made
Yeah.
such a difference in my life. I want them to be good. I want this to work out forever and ever and ever. But having said that, I will still I think that the part of it that I come back to is that, yeah, this is another option as opposed to going to the bank, or for some reason, if Kickstarter isn't the right fit for you, this is another option.
Right.
Does it benefit Patreon more than it benefits the creator? That's something that you could argue about too. I think it definitely benefits Patreon, but it also does what the creator wants it to do. And number three, nobody's twisting these people's arms. These
Yeah,
people can
yeah, but
go in with their eyes wide open and
that's a
decide
disingenuous argument, though. You kind of know that, though, in your heart, that no
that
one's twisting their arms, but it's not great for them. Like, don't. Well,
it's no
listen, I
better.
say
It's
that,
no
but my
better or no worse than a bank loan.
my argument is also disingenuous, just so you know, because I do not know the current rate that they're going to charge, nor do I know the
Oh,
term. So neither one of us can argue. Like, it could be. What if their rate was like, hey, it's going to be a 2% slice off of every month's payment? Great,
right.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And the term can be 10 years. Well, that's not bad either. So all right, yes, go with that. But if it's anything above 10%, and it's going to be because it's a 2-year term, it seems like to repay it,
That's just it.
then
I,
what? Go ahead.
that's just it. I mean, this multitude example, which is the one case study that we've got to go on, because again, they didn't put anything up on their blog. That $75,000. I don't have a calculator here next to me.
I'm going to do it real quick.
What's
I'm going to do it
75
over
grand divided by 24?
over 24 months. That's $3,100 a month plus
Three,
whatever percentage.
so
Because they're
3,000.
charging.
Wait a minute, $3,100.
$3,100 plus whatever rate of interest they're charging.
Depending on how their Patreon's going, 3,100 actually isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Oh, hush you, because that's not the full rate. It's whatever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Plus, if it's 10%,
Oh, yeah.
20%, do we know if it's 30%? Is it predatory? We have no idea.
Right.
Anyway, which again goes back to
I was expecting the number to be bigger, I guess. I was
Yeah, no, that's fine.
momentarily relieved.
Well, but let's say this podcast collective is 10 people. They're collecting $10,000 a month. Each one of them was making $1,000 a month previously. Now each one of them is making, I don't know, 700, 800 bucks a month. That's a
Right.
big difference, you know? Anyway, what I'm getting at though is that, my suspicions are up because Patreon, it is a company, it is a business model that works, that they have trust on, and this fundamentally changes their relationship with both the public at large and with the artist, and I'll tell you why. You, Brad Geiger, come to me and you go, Dave, let's kickstart something that we need $10,000. Let's Kickstarter. I go, no, Brad, I don't want to do Kickstarter. So you personally, Brad, take out one of these $10,000 Kickstarter capital ones, right?
Yeah.
On the future earnings of Evil Inc. Well, next month you break your hand, right? You can no longer draw Evil Inc. ever again.
Right.
So your Patreon immediately starts to dwindle down. The next month goes from $3,000 to $2,000 to $1,000 to $500 to within a month or two, you're at $200 a month. Now you owe back this $10,000, okay?
Right.
We haven't talked about what happens then. Does it get passed on to a collection agency? Do you then start to blog publicly about Patreon screwed me because I took this Patreon capital thing? What I'm getting at is the public trust, the public face of Patreon starts to change when this debt gets passed on to collection agencies and to debt collectors and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to see 2, 3, 4 years down the line, artists writing very different things about their relationship with Patreon than they do now, because this is fundamentally a different business relationship. And it can get weird real quick in 1,000 different ways, kind of like the one I just laid out.
Yeah.
Somebody breaks their hand, a musician can no longer sing. Somebody who had taken money out saying it was for a business loan, but it was for health reasons, that goes south. Like you can imagine all the myriad ways that banks and lending go wrong. This now applies to Patreon. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so for a company that relies on goodwill and public trust, this fundamentally changes their relationship to the world, is what I'm saying. It's a big swing for a potential big downside for them.
No, yeah, well, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the fact
Because
that
remember how hesitant everybody came last time they made that big announcement and they screwed the pooch? And everyone was like, well, maybe I shouldn't use Kickstarter. And then there were some creators who were like, everyone get off Kickstarter or Patreon, whatever it was. And we were like, no, 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 don't say that. And then there was
yeah.
literally 6 months of everyone trying to be PRy course correcting of like, no, they're not doing it that way. They've already abandoned that bad policy.
Mhm.
What I'm saying is trust is fundamental to their business model. And when they start becoming a company that might eventually have to pass on debt to a collection agency or a debt collecting company, uh, that fundamentally changes the public perception of trust or friendliness or approachability that Patreon currently has.
Right.
Yes?
No, I cannot refute that. And the fact that it comes in with the fact that Patreon is how you make money, and it's also this person now you're owing money to, it
Right,
does
right.
muddy the waters.
It muddies the waters and it changes the relationship of one friend. Right now, to me, they are the friendly company that takes 2.9% of my income, but connects me with my readers in a friendly and trustworthy platform where thus far no one has had their information hacked in a couple years. And so I feel great about it, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm just being honest about it.
A couple of years. We've had a good couple of years.
Listen, that's a good run in modern tech America.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So what I'm saying is, though, that changes fundamentally. If Dave Kellett takes out a $20,000 loan to build a new, I don't, whatever it is, art studio, and then it goes feet up, and I'm like, oh shit, what do I do? Oh God, now they're a debt collection company to
Right.
me on my future earnings, right? And then it becomes a relationship of stress and distrust, and a company that's badgering me for money. That's going to happen. That is in Patreon's future. Things are going to go south for their
Mhm.
collections, and I don't know how that's going to help in any way all of us who use Patreon as a platform.
No, no, and when you're right, when things go toes up and Patreon now has to become a debt collector, it's going to be dicey unless they've got that other Patreon running really, really smoothly, and they just take take bigger bites out of that, which is was what the example was given.
Well,
Uh,
because here's what also is going to happen, Brad. You know who's really good about writing emotionally, um, emotionally an emotionally hooked blog with a self-pitying angle that gets people on their side?
hmm.
Artists. Artists are really good at that, and so that's 1,000% going to happen when they start debt collecting on them. You know.
Yes, yes. Listen,
I'm just saying, I can think of a lot of 28-year-old artists that are going to write a really heartstringy kind of blog post about how Patreon's the bad guy for trying to collect that 20,000. You know?
here's my point. You're turning me around on the my
Am I? Oh,
yeah.
all right.
But here's the thing. I'm kind of glad we're doing this, and I'm glad we're doing this for the show because I will die on this hill. The
Okay.
conversation I'm having with you is a lot better than the conversation I'm seeing on Twitter, where again we're calling this a predatory payday loan, which you and I can agree is not accurate in the slightest.
Well,
That's the
I do disagree with you a tiny bit. There is a
you
there
heard
is
me, Dave. You and I agree. Now, don't say anything.
No, I'm saying there's a tiny smidge of predatory
Ah,
payday loan aspect to this that you have to acknowledge, Brad. You have to
no,
acknowledge
a
it's a
payday
tiny
loan is something.
smidge.
Well, a payday loan is something that I can do this month and not do next month, right?
Right. Also, a payday
It's
loan,
a push
one of the
button
reasons
thing.
why they're so predatory is your the collateral that you're putting up might be non-existent aside from your wages
Right.
now. You know what I mean? And so one of the reasons why that's such a predatory rate, whereas it seems in the very limited information we have with this press release,
Hmm.
it seems that you have to show more quote unquote collateral in either other Patreon systems that you have going,
Right.
um, how much your readership brings in general per month. I mean, I understand that that's different than a payday loan, but you've got to admit there are aspects of this that are just a grasshopper's wiener away from being a payday loan.
Now, you know what? I'm gonna disagree 100% on that. A payday loan
All
is
right.
something I can do this month and not do next month. This is something I've got to go down and sit down with Patreon and say, I'm going to have one big expanse of money. This is we can call this a business loan, and that seems to me the most accurate parallel. But to call it a payday loan really isn't accurate. Payday loan is something I can do on almost a push button aspect. I can go into the payday loan place and I can get that advance this month. I can choose not to do it next month. I can do it again the month after that. It's a much different
Right.
thing than what they're talking about in this example, and that is a
Yeah.
business loan for a large sum of money. Then you got to pay
Yeah,
back.
no, I do get what you're saying. That's why I'm saying it's not a payday loan, but gosh, it sure does have it not a duck, but boy, it's quacking a lot like a duck, is what I'm saying.
And to call it predatory, I don't know that I'm
We
going to sign off on that either.
no, I will admit that we can't say that yet because we don't know what the rates are and we don't know what the terms are and we don't know what the follow-up terms are or follow-up steps are to a default on the payback,
Right.
right? We don't know what they very cleverly haven't released any of that yet.
But having said that, so if we take that off and we talk about this just as what it seems to be, and that is much more akin to a business loan. Now, once we talk about it in those respects, and you bring up concerns like, "Hey, this is kind of muddying the waters between Patreon." Now, now I'm ready to listen to that because that's a completely different conversation than the one that I was seeing last night on Twitter, which was, in my opinion, overblown.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I bring that up is because what does Patreon offer to the world? They're not building a car like GM.
Mhm.
They're not building a physical object. Their service is based on trust. Trust that their technology is going to safely and easily process your credit card. Trust that this platform is going to hold on to your data in a safe way. Trust that the artist is going to get paid and that you are going to get debited from your credit card at the same amount every month. It's all based on trust. And what happens is if they start transitioning to a company that's giving out loans where things will start to go south,
Yeah. Yeah.
that public facing trust changes, the mood changes, the marketing changes, the PR changes for all the thousands of reasons that you can imagine that bank loans fail every day, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you
No.
and I, we don't even need to give examples. Everyone at home listening can imagine all the people in their life that have had a bank loan go toes up, right?
Right.
So in general, though, too, this also one of the reasons why I would steer everyone towards doing a Kickstarter is Kickstarter is a very different way of operating a business, and art. Very few artists in my life have ever benefited from going into debt and taking out a
Mm.
loan on their art business.
No, you're absolutely right about
I've
that.
almost 99.99% of the time have I said to people, do whatever you got to do, but don't go into debt. Don't let your credit card build up. Don't take out a loan.
Yeah.
Like, if anything, minimize your expenses to almost nothing rather than taking out a loan. Do not go into debt because an artist lifestyle is impossibly hard to dig out of debt from
Mhm.
if you've taken it on. Yes, believe in yourself. Yes, bank on yourself, but bank on yourself with your time, your money, your energy. Don't bank on yourself with a
With a
bank. That's what I'm saying. With a bank. Uh, so anyway, everything about me kind of goes when I hear this Patreon Capital thing because it doesn't strike me as something that ultimately has artists at their as their best intention. To
Mhm.
me, this has venture capitalists as their best intention, and my suspicions and my hackles go up. And again, that might be me being cynical. That might be me reacting in a way that is not trusting.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
even the fact that I'm having that reaction tells me that this is not a good move for a company that is based on trust and on a
Mm.
public-facing image between artist and audience.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And like I said earlier, I completely acknowledge my blind spot, and I'm very protective of Patreon. But the only difference I'm gonna necessarily say is that I'll agree. I don't think that this is a really good fit for about 90% of the projects that I could envision. Right?
Right.
I don't think it's evil. I don't think it's predatory.
No, I don't.
I do think that they're probably trying to make via their venture capitalist partners happy. I don't know that it's necessarily devious, but also at the same time, I agree. Especially after having talked to you, this is definitely not something that I could ever see myself using.
No, okay, let me be generous now. Now that I've been cynical and been mean, let me be generous. I like the people that work on Patreon.
Oh yeah,
Virtually everyone I've ever talked to at Patreon is a kind person. I have an immediate sense of trust with them. I think they believe in their mission of helping artists build independent careers. Um, and that's virtually everyone that I've ever talked to, up to the senior, executive board um, or executive team that I've talked to.
Mhm.
Right. So I like everyone there. I also believe that Patreon as a company has where they've stumbled. They've said as they've learned in a learning process, hey, we messed up. We're going to do better. We're going to listen. We're going to try to do more feedback sessions before we roll out something new. So I think as a company, they are learning and growing, and you have to respect that just because a smallish company like Patreon is still in learning mode, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think, is this inherently an evil thing? No. To your point, Brad, I think I am cynical about it, but I don't think that it's evil. It's just one more aspect of business. Where I get anxious about it is mainly in what it does to the relationship between artists and Patreon and between Patreon's public trust as some of these stories will start to go south.
Oh,
Um,
that's the part
so,
that
but
bothers me the most is like you said, at one of these days, we're going to read one of these stories that said, I took $10,000 from Patreon and then I broke my hand or I got cancer and now I can't pay it back. And now Patreon is, is knocking on my door with debt collectors. I can't imagine that's a great place for Patreon to be.
no, you're going to have artists making public appeals to, hey, fund my GoFundMe so that I can pay off
Oh
Patreon,
shit.
so that I can pay. I'm not kidding. That's
Yeah,
going to
they
happen.
take out one crowdfunder to pay the other.
Which
Oh my
That's
God, that's
that's part of
horrible.
the problem, and that's part of the problem in letting yourself get into debt is
Yeah.
that cycle of like, taking out a new credit card to pay off the old credit card.
Hmm.
That's why I'm saying just don't do it if you can avoid it. Anyway, this is all of this, Brad. The capstone of all of this is I want Patreon to succeed.
Yeah.
I want them to be a thriving, going company, and here's something that not a lot of people like to say. I want them to make a profit.
Right.
I want them to be a
Oh
happy,
yeah.
profitable company. I want them to pay their employees well, which they seem to do. I want them to be a happy environment, a safe environment, which they seem to be.
Hmm.
I want them to thrive because if they thrive, I and thousands of other artists that I know survive well,
Right.
They are a wonderful part of our business, and they have brought a real, genuine, and new service into the world that did not exist before and has been a value add to thousands of artists' lives. I want them to succeed. I just think this move, I don't love it. That's the
Yeah.
short. That's the short end of it. I don't love it.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I don't. Yeah, I gotta agree. I'm not crazy about it. I'm not crazy about it for the reasons that we were supposed to not be crazy about it. But now I'm not crazy about it for a whole new set of reasons.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. But again, I wish them well. I want them to succeed. I like them as a company, and I like them as individuals. And I personally have tremendous trust for them for what they've been able to do for my company.
Yeah.
So this move, I just feel like it's wrong-footed.
Woof.
Again, I don't feel like it has evil malintent. I do feel like it's investor-oriented, not artist-oriented,
Hmm.
and I don't love the move. So
Well, we'll put a pin in this discussion for now. Hopefully, shortly we will have an actual press release from Patreon with numbers that we can judge.
wouldn't it
We
be
can.
embarrassing, by the way, if that press release comes out after we've released the show 2 or 3 weeks from now?
Yeah, and it turns out
And
that
it's all like it addresses all our concerns.
yeah,
And we're like, why did we record that show the day they
yeah,
announced
we'd
it in
have
the
to
Verge?
run and delete it. Well, listen,
Yeah.
here's the one thing is that I was thinking about this last night. In fact, I was up talking to you in my brain at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, hello. Hi.
And
I love that you're talking to me at 3
oh yeah,
a.m.
yeah,
Hello.
just
Brad, this wedding ring comes right off.
but I thought, you know what? If I get it completely wrong, if I go in there and do this impassioned defense, and I completely am ass backwards, we'll have a great show out of that too. I'll come
Yeah.
on and I'll tell you, holy moly, I was completely wrong.
Well, and again, I open this up to our the folks that use our Patreon Discord server. This is for the Patreon
Yeah.
backers of the show. By all means, prove me wrong. Like, tell me why I might be wrong and why this is a great step, and tell Brad why he might be wrong and why this is a bad step.
Or tell
Like, by all
Dave why
means.
he might be wrong and why he's a bad step. Or tell Dave that he's wrong and that
I said Dave first. I said Dave first. Oh my God. Oh, he's so angry.
That was selective listening. I only heard the part that I didn't want to hear.
It said Brad. No, what I'm getting at is, though, I would love to see this discussion in our Discord servers, because there's a lot of really impassioned, intelligent people. So by all means, bring it in there and let us know what you think, because I would like to hear more about this. I hope that this will launch, and much like merch for members, it will just kind of fizzle and be a background thing that we hear about once every blue moon, and no one we know ever uses it, and that'll be that. That's what I hope will happen with it.
That's the only thing that gives me a little bit of hope, is that they've only done it like a dozen times so far, and I would hope that they're really, really screening those potential loans very closely, because, man, there's like you point out rightly, there's a lot of places this can go south. I hope they're screening them tight.
There's a lot of downside
Yeah.
for a company that has a lot of very eloquent artists interacting with it, you know.
Yes.
And I mean that sincerely. Who better in society has the ability to turn people's opinions south than an artist who is eloquent and good at their craft?
Yeah.
You know, that can go real bad for Patreon real quick. Anyway, wow, we talked for 44 minutes on this so far. Jeez Louise. Well, there's our show for this week, everybody.
I feel completely lighter now.
I'm exhausted. I'm spent. I'm just like, I'm tired. Also, I don't like disagreeing with you. I'm very uncomfortable about that. I didn't like 44 minutes of disagreeing with you.
Well, here, if it makes any feel better, I think we still disagree, but a lot less than we did 44 minutes ago.
Yeah, like, here's where we agree. Neither Brad nor I think it's a good idea to use this.
No.
I mean, I think that's where we agree. Both Brad and I would say build your business in a way that relies on or necessitates debt in the smallest way possible, ideally in zero ways possible. We both kind of think that Kickstarter is a better way to get that cash advance, because it not only is the cash advance, it represents a public test of whether this product or art or invention is even warranted in the public, is it even has a response that would warrant it being made.
Right.
So we do agree on a lot, Brad, actually, now that I think about it. And we both probably would say it's fine that Patreon capital exists. Like, it's not going to ruin anyone for the most part. It's not going to ruin. If you're not using it, it's definitely not going to affect you at all.
Yeah.
Well, no, I take that back. If it ruins Patreon's public image, it
Then
could
it starts to become
potentially
a
hurt
drag.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Right,
you're not
right.
wrong.
So,
you're not wrong.
but it's like you always say, we are the main direct line to our readership and our listenership about what Patreon is. And as long as you and I don't become that kind of artist that goes, Patreon is screwing me, and it's like, you and I always say, why are these artists shooting themselves in the foot?
Oh, yeah, Patreon is screwing me. Support my Patreon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Let's not go back to that.
I know.
I'll tell you what, let's stick a pin in this one. And when that blog comes out, as it eventually will, we'll revisit it and see how wrong we were or how right we were.
All right, well, Brad, let's put that aside, like you said, and let's turn to happier topics, which is in the mail today. You and I both received a little something special from the good folks at Wacom.com, WACOM.com. So let me give some background information for everybody before we share with what has arrived. So Wacom has kindly been sponsoring the podcast, and when they came back for round 2 of the sponsorship, which will be extending through June, we said, well, what would you like us to focus on? Like, we're both Brad and I own multiple Wacoms, use them every day, love them, and so we've spent our own money on them, and so we can endorse them heartily. And they said, actually, we have a new Wacom coming out called the Wacom One. Would you talk about that? And then they said, would you both like one? And Brad and I, I'll be honest, we're not dummies. You don't say no when a tech company says, hey, would you like one of our beautiful new products in the mail? Listen, Mama didn't raise no chump. I say yes to that email.
No, and actually, it was funny how quickly we both responded too. It was like my response and Dave's response, came back within like a nanosecond.
I It's like when someone asked me to a dance in high school. I was like, yes, 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 I'm happy to go. Yes, yes, I very much want to go to that dance.
Dave actually managed to type out yes. My response was YE. And then I had to ship them the S separately.
YE send. YE send. Anyway, they have arrived in the mail, and so we thought it would be fun to take people, Brad tapping on the box for everybody, to just sort of unwrap it and describe what we're looking at here. Because so the idea with the Wacom One is that it's a smaller, portable, much lighter device than previous ones, much more for pros, pro-ams, and amateurs alike, in the sense that it is a much more manageable price point. It's like a $400 one versus the gigantic ones that Brad and I have bought. And this one, the idea is that there is one cord coming to your Wacom One. So in a cafe, it's a little easier to work. You don't like the older ones that had multiple cords coming, were a little bit trickier on a tabletop setting. So,
well, yeah, that originally the 12WX, which is what I had been using for years before I was able to save up for my 24 Pro. The 12WX was originally their travel model. In fact, that's why Scott bought it and then bequeathed it to me back in 2012. Was because he was going to use it at conventions, and it's a workhorse. I loved it, but it was not great for portability because it had two different bricks that you had to plug into, and tons of cords going all over the place. And it wasn't super great for portability. What I'm looking forward to with this Wacom One is to see that new cord and hopefully pair that with a laptop and see if it's a little bit more portable. And I could actually go, like I think I was saying last show, go in and take that to like my kids' choir practice and actually get some work done for a change.
Yeah, exactly. So, Brad, I'm going to be honest with you. We said we were going to unbox it. I've already jumped ahead like a small child at Christmas, and I've opened up the outer box, and it's a little bit. Go ahead and start unwrapping, because I'm already ahead of you.
This is a true unboxing. This is my X-Acto knife here. Because I sat in the parking lot for an hour this morning waiting for the UPS guy because he was not going to pull that crap on me again. And literally, I showed him the sign where I said, "Here's my phone number. I had it out there, 2 days ago. Are you guys not allowed to call a number to have somebody come out?" And he looks at me and says, "Oh no, we're allowed to do that." But then,
then hands you your box and walks off.
Yeah, we're allowed to do it. We just don't want to do it for you.
And then they're like, "Well, who was the driver that was here Tuesday?" "Oh, that was me. I just didn't give a shit." So I.
Oh, by the way, stand still. I'll spit in your face. Just as long as I'm doing horrible things to you, Geiger, I'll just kick you too.
While you're unboxing that outer one, I will describe for people. It's kind of a Russian nesting doll, as with a lot of electronics that come in boxes. There's a big outer box. A really slick white inner box, and then as you open that one, there is another very cleverly designed. One of the reasons why I'm very hip on this box is that I don't know if you know this, Brad. For a couple of years there at Mattel, I worked in the packaging department, and I, who knew nothing about structural engineering, became really good friends with all the structural engineers because it was really fun to design boxes that were clever. And the interior of this one is very clever when you get to it, in terms of the way they have packed this together. So anyway, I'm going to start talking about it while you can hear Brad unboxing it in the background. So when you get in from the Russian nesting dolls into the box, what you are presented with is a 13.3-inch screen. Are you there yet, Brad?
Yep. Oh, I'm reading the back. I'm listening to you and reading the back.
Unboxing. He's like, "Hold on, I want to check the legalese on this before I unbox it."
No, it said that it came with software. Now I'm all excited about seeing what software.
So here's first impressions looking at this. It's very beautifully designed. It's very lightweight. I have the both the Cintiq Pro on my desk. That's the gigantic one. And then I have the Cintiq Companion, which is a few years back. It's like a mobile it's the version of their Mobile Studio Pro now. And what Cintiq has done in the last few years, and a lot of computing has done in the last few years, is the glass has gotten so much better on the device itself. And this has the same glass that my Pro has, which has kind of a matte anti-glare finish.
Mhm.
Oh, now Brad has his out. I can see on the
Yeah.
camera Brad has his
Now,
out.
this has so I didn't know that it was going to come in its little own pouch, which is
Yep.
actually I like that kind of stuff because I'm
Yeah.
the first thing I'm thinking is what am I going to put this in my laptop bag? You know, it's not going to get scratched up, but it's got
Yeah,
a
you can
little
sleeve it before you put it in the bag, which is nice.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
got a little sheath.
Sheath,
And
yeah.
wow, is this is like I was expecting something the size of like a digital tablet. This is a little bit bigger, which is good for me, and super
Now
light.
flip it over and check out the stands on the upper back. You can flip those open.
Oh, they flip.
Now look inside. Look inside the stands. For everybody that's used to Wacom before, the pen has its
Oh,
own little stand normally. In
yeah.
this one, they put the quills underneath. Isn't that clever how they designed that?
Wow. What a thoughtful thing. Yeah, you got extra quills in there, extra
So in terms
nibs.
of portability, what's nice about this is I don't know if anybody has ever used a laptop drawing device or computer where it vents directly to your crotch and your crotch becomes 1,000 degrees.
Yes, yeah,
Like
I always
I
appreciated
can
that
say I've
myself.
had many a computer that did that. Might have limited me from having children, I'm not sure. This
Well,
one
I
though,
appreciated that too.
this one does not have that. And there's as far as I can tell, there's not a vent on this. So you know how recent computing has much more of a because of low energy use screens
Hmm.
and the like, they don't need to vent it or fan it, and that's what this one is. It's completely encased, which is nice. Because
Yeah.
also, I'm going to tell you, what has two thumbs and spills a lot of coffee on their Cintiq at a coffee shop? This guy.
That guy
So
right
I
there.
appreciate that this thing is really well encased here and doesn't have a lot of openings. This is nice.
Wow,
Anyway,
look at this cord. This is night and day from my 12WX.
yeah, the advances that they've made in cords over the last couple of years is really nice because it used to have. For those that have never seen it, the older ones had this gigantic dongle that
Yeah, oh
if you got transported back in time and had to fight a knight, you could use them as a mace. Like you could swing that thing around and
yeah.
clock somebody in the head. Now it
I'm
is.
glad to find out I'm not the only one whose dongle has gotten smaller over time.
Oh, Bradley J. Geiger. Well, there goes our show, everybody. As soon as Brad starts talking about his
Oh, the one
dongle,
show
it's time
the one show our sponsors are going to listen very closely to, and I just ruined it.
to.
Sorry, tune
Anytime.
in next week for the Dave show. I'll just
Anytime
sit
Brad
in
starts talking about his
just sit in
dongle.
the corner.
I mean, honestly, Brad, though, hold it up as though it were a stereotypical pizza pie with one
Yeah,
hand underneath it. See
yeah.
how light that SOB is. That thing
That
is
is,
great.
yeah, that's way lighter than I expected it to be.
It feels like for those trying to guess what the weight is, it feels like a large tablet in terms of weight. Now, compare that weight to any laptop you would pick up, and you'd be like, "Oh, that's significantly more."
Yeah.
This feels like a lightweight, large tablet, is what it feels like in terms of weight.
Yeah, I've got one of those wireless keyboards, and I'm just holding them both up. It's about the same weight as my keyboard.
Yeah, so for me, if when I would take this on the go, I would probably, looking at it, plug it into a laptop. And
Hmm.
so I would have. So for those that I should have led with this, it's not an onboard computer. This is a pen display, not a pen computer. So you would plug it into your existing PC or Apple and go from there. But just in terms of first blushes for this week, Brad, next week we'll talk about usability after we've done it. But I dig the look of this. It's
Yeah,
fun
I
to
just
see.
since my little Indicio scale was here for shipping, 2 pounds 5 ounces.
Is what this
That's
weighs.
all this thing weighs.
Wow.
That's super light.
I'm glad that Brad measured his dongle. That's great. That's nice to. That's
Well, it
how
is
good for
3 o'clock.
everybody at home.
It's 3 o'clock somewhere.
I like that 3 o'clock was the time you chose, not 8 o'clock, not 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Oh, that's
Yeah,
what a proud moment
three
for Brad.
o'clock in the morning, if you remember from the earlier segment.
So next week we'll try this out in the studio and at a coffee shop or something. And next week we'll give you the first blush impressions on the
Yeah.
used. But we thank Wacom for sponsoring the show and for sending out the Wacom Ones. We're going to try them out and let you guys know how they go on a day-to-day basis in the studio here. But for this week, we thank Wacom as our sponsor, wacom.com. And
Wait, Dave, hold on.
okay, what's up?
We almost forgot to do thanks for the kind words. It's my
Thanks
favorite
for the
part
kind
of the
words.
show.
Oh, the one part of the show where I feel good about myself. Here we go.
Yeah, we need a little kind words after that first 45-minute segment. So here's one, and this comes in from Magnus Apollo,
What a
who
great name.
did a nice 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And Magnus says, "I'm giving this 5 stars because in the first few episodes, I grasped how to improve my Patreon page, how to handle Kickstarter better, ways to improve my site, and countless other tips and tricks that aren't just about comics, but about the design industry as a whole.
Ah.
I've followed Dave for nearly 20 years now. When I
Wow.
stumbled across Sheldon, and now Drive is my favorite webcomic. It's great to hear the knowledge spewed out in such an entertaining way. And if you don't laugh along with Brad's infectious laugh, then you are dead inside." No mention as to whether old Brad does a comic though. A big fan of Drive. No indication whatsoever if
Brad,
old Brad does
oh,
a
for
comic.
God's sake, you just got a compliment that literally your laugh itself, just your laugh is bringing joy to the world. And you have found a way to spin that into an
Oh,
insult.
isn't that the way your mind works?
Isn't that the way
It's
the
like
artist's mind works?
somebody
Yeah.
can say the nicest thing, and all you hear is the all I heard was the negative. It's like you
You literally
mentioned
just
Dave.
got
When are
the
you going to mention me?
You literally just got the verbal equivalent of Brad literally lights up my life,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, I guess I'm not the perfect person over here. Tell you what, I'm.
Oh well. Do check out Evil Inc. It's not bad. A great addition to my workday listen. Thanks, guys. And that comes from my Magnus Apollo, which, by the way, is one of the better
that's
usernames I've seen in a
that's
long
a
time.
great name, Magnus
Yeah,
Apollo.
Magnus Apollo.
That
It,
feels like I know it's a little too on the nose, but it feels like that should be a Rocky Balboa boxer,
yeah,
Magnus Apollo. That's great. Magnus, thank you for the kind words. That is really nice of you. I am so glad. It's really rewarding, Brad. We've had this with more than a few people where
yeah,
they are not cartoonists. They're not in cartooning. They don't do
yeah,
comics, but they are in some form of either visual arts or in communications or some form of public-facing thing. And they're talking about the universality of some of the advice that we share. And it's really heartwarming because
yeah.
I'll tell you why. Brad and I, trying to keep our heads on a swivel, have paid very close attention to what are graphic artists doing online?
Oh yeah.
What are painters doing online? How are our fiction writers, not comics, but fiction writers working their magic online? And so it's nice when we can all share in a kind of a rising tide way our best tips and tricks to one another. And that's really affirming. It's really nice to hear that. So thank you, Magnus.
Yes, thank you.
And do check out evil-comic.com. I will say that on Brad's behalf because Brad is too humble to say it. I gotta say, we are currently rereading I and the Little One in the house,
Oh,
Evil Inc., and am delighted by it.
can you share the tagline that's become my new favorite tagline in the whole world?
Oh, the what my little one said? You go
Yeah.
ahead and share it.
I got to remember if I get it right, but it's filled with superheroes that are really funny and have a lot of crushes on each other.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. No, yeah, I think it was like the superheroes having a lot of adventures, and they also have a lot of crushes on each other.
That has become my new favorite. My favorite phrase: have a lot of crushes on each other. I just love it so much.
It's been a fun read in the house to go through. We're currently on book 6, I think. No, book
Ah,
7. And so, anyway, Magnus, thank you for the kind words. We genuinely appreciate it. And for those that haven't done so yet, please head over to iTunes Podcast or Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review with a few kind words. It goes a great way to not only helping to spread the word about the show on algorithms, it goes a great way to making Brad feel insulted, even with a compliment.
Brad will find an insult in anything.
Listen, everybody, Brad's from the Midwest. You could say 9 wonderful things about him, and he'll find a way to spin that into an
It's
insult.
funny you
So,
point. I really did. I completely missed the part where he was saying something very nice, and all I
yes,
heard was that I
oh my
wasn't
God,
being
you son of a
clever.
bitch. He was complimenting you, and you found a way to spin it into self-hate. Well, I guess I'm not pretty. He didn't say I was pretty. Mother always said I wasn't pretty. Like, Brad, what are you doing? He's actively complimenting you. Well, he didn't say anything nice about my shoes. I guess I'm.
Clearly, I don't measure up.
So we thank our sponsors over at wacom.com. And Brad,
Yes.
Who have folks been listening to this week?
Oh my gosh. Well, listen, I'll tell you right now, you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
The Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/comiclab. Brad, I gotta say, one of the bad aspects of now doing this podcast on video is that I get to see you handling your dongle, and this is not something I signed up for in doing this podcast. I did not.
I'm equally upset because usually I charge $10 an hour for that.
Oh God, jeez! I'm out. I am out. I'll see everybody next week.